This is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
Hello and welcome to another edition of The People's Business. I'm your host, Shane Seeley, and tonight's topic, the significance of emancipation to Barbadians in 2022. To talk to us a bit and share their thoughts on emancipation, what it means to them, we have His Excellency David Comissiong, Barbados' ambassador to Caricom, and along with him we have Keturah Babb, a Rastafari elder. So stick around, we have a lot to digest, at least you, our viewers, have a lot to digest tonight as we talk about emancipation, the season of emancipation, and what it means to all of us. We'll take a break and be right back. Back here with you on The People's Business, and we really want you viewers to chime in tonight too. Remember those numbers to call: 228-5562, 228-5563. But we have to talk about what emancipation means to you as a Barbadian, or to you as an African, to you as wherever you come from. What does emancipation mean for you? Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. The popular lyrics from a very, very popular song, redemption song, Bob Marley. And those words created so long ago have so much meaning even today for all of us. And I'm pretty sure Ambassador Comissiong agrees on that. I really want to get your thoughts, Ambassador, because this is something that you have focused some of your life works on. Speaking about emancipation, not only what it means to you, but what we deserve in terms of compensation for what was done to our ancestors hundreds of years ago. So tell us, what does emancipation mean to you, Ambassador?
Thank you, Shane. Well, emancipation or freedom is really the central theme that runs through the entire history of Barbados. In fact, if you are searching for the soul of the nation of Barbados, the soul of the Barbadian people, the fundamental principle of identity of the Barbadian people, it has to be connected with the search, the struggle for freedom. And I say that because Barbados began its history as a nation, as a people, in slavery. We were the world's first out and out slave society, not just a society that had slavery as a feature of it, but a society that was constructed totally on the basis of enslavement. And so from the very outset, that condition of enslavement generated in the masses of the Barbadian people a longing for freedom and a struggle for freedom. And when we say freedom, we are talking about freedom from physical bondage, but we are also talking about the freedom from social oppressions, the freedom to make or to recreate an existence that was meaningful and valuable for our people. And so when we talk about emancipation, we cannot simply be referring to the event that took place on the 1st of August, 1834, when the British Parliament passed the Emancipation Act. That was an important milestone in our journey towards freedom, in our struggle for freedom. But that doesn't define that. That in itself does not encapsulate emancipation. In fact, just last year, we achieved another very significant milestone in our emancipation journey when we threw off the Queen of England as our head of state and confirmed ourselves as a republic. So when you go through the history of Barbados from 1649, the very first slave revolt, 1675, the revolt centered around coffee, 1683, 1686, 1692, 1701, 1816, the Buster Rebellion, 1834, when as a result of the unrelenting rebellions, not just in Barbados, but across the entire Caribbean, the British Parliament came to the conclusion that they had no choice but to pass the Emancipation Act. And then we go on, 1876, the Confederation riots, 1937, 1966, independence, 2021. So it is, emancipation for us is a journey. It has not yet been completed, Shane, but it is the central motif running through the entire history of Barbados.
And that comment creates a whole series of questions. For instance, if it is a journey, will the journey ever end? Keturah, Elder Babb, I want to come to you here to get your thoughts on emancipation and what it means to you as a Rastafari elder.
Certainly. Thank you very much for having me on the program. And to concur with what was already said, but to take it further, emancipation then, when we consider that it is a journey, what is it that we are working towards? What is the destination? Certainly the destination is the creation of a just society. We're trying to create not systems of bondage, but systems of freedom where restrictions are eliminated and a just society is created, such that every individual experiences social rights, spiritual autonomy, economic enfranchisement, political participation. All the systems of the society work and conduce to the enhancement of the quality of life of the individual, of each person knowing themselves, of each person being very self-assured in their identity. And because we are speaking of a nation that is perhaps about 95% African descendant, being secure in your African identity and embracing your African identity. And of course, Rastafari epitomizes that journey of almost 100 years when the rest of the region rose up to protest the drastic conditions that continued and persisted after enslavement officially ended. Rastafari took a different path. A number of ones thought that they would look within and strengthen themselves spiritually and root themselves in their African centeredness and African consciousness. At the base of that was that search for personal identity, an identity rooted in Africa rather than in the colonial masters and the former enslavers, an identity that conveyed and nurtured and brought forth within each one that autonomy, that self-assurance, that capability, that trust within ourselves that we are capable, that we can shape our own lives, and that we can do it in terms of justice for all. So emancipation really looks at journeying, but towards the destination of being totally free of oppressive systems, of systems that restrict us, but as a nation and as individuals towards healing, towards healing from all of the harms that were done to us during slavery, of throwing off that yoke, the legacies, the negative legacies of slavery that really bedevil us up to now to varying degrees for different people, but we are still shackled in some ways by some of those negative legacies of slavery. And emancipation is to throw off that shackle mentally, spiritually, physically, in every dimension of our lives, so that we are whole and we are strong and we are people who respect ourselves and love ourselves and see the Almighty in each person that looks at us.
I think that it has been pretty difficult for generation after generation to keep connected, and we're trying to rebuild some of these bridges that were broken, that should not have really ever existed, between Barbados, the rest of the region, where African descendants are, and the motherland, that being Africa. Most of our descendants are from West Africa, Ghana specifically. But I want to tell you both a story to show you how big this disconnect is, because, and this is a very simple one. I was out over earlier in the weekend, and there were some Nigerians at this place I was at, and the DJ said, we have some Africans in the house, you know, big up the Africans that are in the house, you know, they're having a good time, and whatever. But my thing is, the fact is, you have these people that really originate from the same place that we are from, and you are identifying them as Africans, but you are also Africans. It's just that you weren't born there. So you see the disconnect among the generations as the generations go on, and you can only believe that the disconnect will continue to grow unless something is done about it. I mean, education is always the key. We have the season of emancipation that we are currently in right now. It's the longest season of emancipation that we are expected to have, and that is significant in its own right. How do we kill these disconnects? How do we repair or start to repair what is really, when most people look at it, irreparable damage?
No, Shane.
David,
I don't think
before you go,
that's not the right way.
That's not the right way to look at it? You go first,
I don't think that's
Ambassador.
the right way. I don't think that's the right way of looking at it, because I think we have to be conscious that when we came across that Middle Passage, we brought Africa with us. Our ancestors brought Africa with us. We then we brought our African culture with us. We brought our African selves, our African psyches. Yes, there were efforts made by the white oppressor class in the Caribbean to try to strip us of that African culture and that African identity. They were never successful. A lot of it was internalized. To some extent, it went underground. And we as an African people, we interacted with the new circumstances we found ourselves in the Caribbean. We were brought and deposited into locations of great evil and barbarity, great inhumanity. We then had to take our African selves, our African culture, our African impulses. We had to fight to maintain our humanity, but we also had to fight to humanize these locations of barbarity that we had been deposited in. And so, and over a period of centuries, 400 years, look at what we have developed. I mean, in Sister Keturah, we have the Rastafari. The Rastafari, the spirituality of the Rastafari, the culture of the Rastafari, that is an outgrowth of our African struggle right here in the Caribbean. I mean, we need to think of ourselves, Shane, as global Africa. And we, the people of Barbados, the African people of Barbados and the Caribbean, we have added a component, a very valuable component to the culture of global Africa. We have added something, whether it is our reggae music, our calypso, whether it is our nation languages, our proverbs. They are Caribbean, but they are rooted in Africa, and they are our contribution to the culture and heritage and arts and philosophy and spirituality and social inventions of global Africa, and I think that is how we have to see it. So, to the extent that you may have Barbadians, black Barbadians, who do not understand that they are connected to Nigerians or that they are connected to continental Africa, that is an issue of confusion, of lack of clarity in their thinking. But I will tell you that the culture that they practice, the culture that their ancestors developed right here in struggle in these Caribbean territories, is intrinsically an African culture. It's a contribution to the culture of global Africa. And you know something, Shane, we must be very clear. When we look back at our history in these Caribbean islands and this Barbados, it is not a history of degradation. Our history is a source of dignity, because our ancestors, faced with the most horrendous oppression, resisted it with great courage, with great resilience, with great dignity, and they transcended it. Yes, as Keturah says, in some ways we may have been marked in a negative way by that oppression, and yes, there are always things that we have to get right in our psyche and our cultures. But however, when you look at the big picture, our story has been one of great courage and dignity and resilience and endurance, and it is something we should feel extremely proud about.
And that's why we're glad that we have you here, and also Elder Keturah, so that you both can share those experiences, those historic experiences that would have led us to where we are today. And we'll talk a bit more about the season of emancipation as well. Elder Keturah, I know you want to get in on some of my comments that I would have shared just now as well. So when we come back after this break, we can get into that too. But remember, viewers, those numbers to call if you want to be a part of our conversation tonight as we discuss the significance of emancipation to you Barbadians in 2022. Those numbers to call, 228-5562, 228-5563. We'll take a short break and we will be back in a moment. Back with you on The People's Business as we focus on the significance of emancipation. Elder Keturah, we'll come to you momentarily, but we do have a caller on the line. They want to get into our conversation tonight. Good night, caller. Welcome to The People's Business as we focus on emancipation. What's your question?
Good night. Hello.
Good night.
Yes, mine is not a question. Mine is more of a comment. For years, we've been talking about emancipating ourselves, and Bob Murray talked about emancipating ourselves from mental slavery. But I studied Caribbean history at school, and if I remember quite clearly, it was our African brothers and sisters, our African brothers that sold us into slavery, and we focused so much on the European aspect of it, but we don't focus on the fact that they were the ones who sold us into slavery, and some of them. I mean, my parents used to live in England, and they would say to me that the Africans really and truly, they don't really care about the Caribbean people. They refer to us as children of slaves. They say, we don't know, you don't know if you're a child of a slave, you don't know who you are. And we focus too much on the European aspect, but we are not focusing on the fact that they are the ones who sold us into slavery in the first place. And if it's anyone who should apologize to us, it should be them. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments, caller, and some interesting comments too, because they ring very familiar for me as well. With my first, some of my first conversations with direct descendants of Ghanaians. And I had this perception, like her, these were some of the same things that I heard, that, you know, those, say, the direct descendants of Africans living in, say, the UK, they would call their black brothers and sisters from the region Caribbeans, and some of them don't mingle or mix, and then they would share very similar comments as well. Ambassador, I see you shaking your head, but this is something that rings very familiar to me as well.
It's not necessarily true.
I'll let Keturah have first bite at it.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Elder Keturah.
You know, Malcolm X asked us, who taught you to hate yourself? The source from which you get your information matters. And this is a story that we have been fed for a very long time, that it was the Africans who sold their brothers and sisters or other tribes into slavery. And that seems to absolve the purchaser, and we listen to the version that the purchaser gives us without digging deep enough. I think the comment, first of all, thank you, caller, for sharing that. Because while you had the bravery to speak up, there may be many people who still have that idea, who've been taught that, like I was taught that, and I'm sure David was taught that in our early years. But we've been able to search, research, and establish bonds and connections that totally dispel that. And to explain the whole history and the whole involvement from which statements like that arise and history like that is taught is, again, another program, another lesson. But I want to assure our caller and other people who hold on to this attitude and this thinking, because that's what they were taught, that we need to open up and find new sources of information and understand the complexity that the slave trade, the trade in Africans generated on the continent, what level of involvement any different nations and groups had in the trade, and to what extent they really did sell us into slavery. I've heard most of what was said, but let me just share a small experience. When I was in Durban in 2001, I asked a gentleman on the road directions to a certain place. And he wanted to know, he gave me the directions, but he wanted to place my accent. So I explained that I was from the Caribbean and that a group of us had come for this conference against racism, xenophobia, and other forms of intolerances. I might not be saying the entire name right. And when I explained who I was and why we were here, he asked, but why did it take you so long to come home? That small experience belied all the indoctrination I had had. Of course, as Rastafari, I had already disabused myself of these notions. But in a heart-to-heart exchange on a roadside in South Africa, this is what somebody standing next to me on the road had to say to me. Why did it take so long for you to come home? And to proceed and to continue our lives with the notions that Africans sold us, that they voluntarily sold us, that white skill, they sold us, that they profited in some way from the slave trade, is not to have the entire picture. There's a lot more that we should know, that we should open up our minds to make ourselves very knowledgeable. And in this day and age, when information is so available to us, when at our fingertips, in our pockets, in our hands, most of the time, we do have the access to information. I think it's about time that we try to be a little more informed than the one-sided story we are told. And that connects to what you raised earlier about building bridges. The story that you just told about the Nigerians being identified as Africans, for me, represents a lot of progress. There was a time when they may not have been identified, or not, certainly not welcomed and identified in the best way, for the very reasons that the caller gave. We were all indoctrinated into that thinking. But I think we've made tremendous progress over the years. Certainly the influence of Bob Marley and the Wailers, a lot of very conscious early singers, very revolutionary reggae artists who gave out that message of we being all African, of building bonds, actually going to the motherland and performing there, and people coming to recognize and realize who we are and how much Africa has been recreated in us. African influences, reggae influences on the continent, Rastafari influences on the continent. There's so much that has happened. And of late, we are seeing that at the political level, our leaders are themselves forging bonds of friendship, of recognition, of being of one family. I remember one lady coming from the General Assembly, having listened to Sir Hilary Beckles make the case about the legacies of slavery. And she talked about how spellbound people were listening. And when he evoked Bob Marley and the other artists of the region, the ripple of response that went through the room. I wasn't in the room myself at that time, but it bears testimony to how we've been building links. And I'm sure the ambassador can talk a little more about the official links, the links that have been made at the political level, and how we're building bridges, very strong bridges, and drawing closer to one another. So the idea that our African brothers and sisters sold us into slavery, did so willingly, and that they owe us an apology more than anyone else. The bridges that we have been building and the bonds that we are creating and recreating and strengthening among us tells us that we've gone past that narrative, we've gone past that indoctrination, and there's certainly much more that is being done than we can discuss in this short program. Thank you, Shane.
Yeah, there is a lot more to be done, because I'm very sure that there are a lot of people out there with that. That is the story that they have been fed. That's the story that they've been told, and that's what they will live by. Before you join back in on the conversation, Ambassador, we do have another caller. Let's see what their thoughts are as we try to get more people in here tonight. Good night, caller. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question? Hello, good night. I'm barely hearing you. Okay, well, we seem to have lost that caller. Ambassador Comissiong, you wanted to make a comment following on from Elder Keturah.
To be helpful to that lady, I am the author of a fairly extensive essay titled "Debunking the Myth of the African Responsibility for Slavery." And if that lady or anybody else who has, who is holding on to this false notion, wants the information, they can contact me at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I would gladly make the essay available to them. As Keturah said, we don't have the time really to go into all of it tonight, but it is a myth. It is a myth, and I can easily share the info. Now, but Shane, you made a point about sometimes meeting continental Africans and having some difficulty in the relationship. And I want to share with you a little story told to me by Sir Conrad Hunt. And he was relating to me how I guess back in the 60s, he had gone to South Africa on some kind of project, and he was, interacting with the African brothers in South Africa, and he was experiencing the same thing, that there was this difficulty in the relationship, and he was indicting these South Africans, and he said one night, he really thought about it, and it suddenly came home to him that he had come to South Africa with an attitude of superiority, because we our attachment to Britain and to the British culture, and he had come with this notion that somehow we Caribbean blacks were somehow on a higher peg, and he said that he went to the South Africans and he apologized, and he said after that they had this wonderful relationship. So the point I'm trying to make is that there can be missteps on both sides. There can be Caribbean people who go to the African continent, or who interact with continental Africans and take mistaken notions of cultural superiority, and vice versa. You can perhaps find a similar thing coming from the African side, because after all, in Africa you do have what should I say, a segmented society. You do have elites. You do have domestic elites who will probably feel themselves superior, perhaps not only to West Indian blacks or Caribbean blacks, but to their own African citizens. So I guess we have to be conscious of this, that we are not perfect people. But whatever missteps we might make, ultimately we are family, we are kith and kin. Yes, we have been separated for a long time, and out of that separation can come misapprehensions and misconceptions about each other. But as Keturah has said, those are minor blimps on the road towards the coming together as an African family. I myself have been to I've experienced 9 different African countries, and I can tell you, my experience has been almost totally positive, a total welcoming and a reconnection. And of course, I am married to a Ghanaian, so yes, the family is coming together, and any misconceptions that we may have in terms of our family relationship, those are being gradually sorted out and put into proper perspective.
It's all about making some progress in rebuilding these connections with the African continent. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we take you through the show. But there is another topic, the elephant in the room, and it has been an elephant for quite a while, these reparations, that there has been so much resistance on the other side of the pond. And we'll come back and talk about where we are at with the fight in terms of reparations for Barbados and the region right after this break. It's all about the significance of emancipation to Barbadians in 2022. That's our focus tonight on the people's business. And of course, we have with us His Excellency David Comissiong, Barbados' ambassador to Caricom, and Keturah Babb is a Rastafari elder. And we also have a caller on the line. Good night, caller. Welcome to the people's business. What is your question?
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. First things first, let me start with the little things that have been speaking volumes over the past few years. I want to thank the CBC for bringing this program this evening. I am thankful because it's a complete and it's obviously an approach and an intentional decision to help us to renew our minds in the direction from whence we came. I want to thank you, Shane, and the other Shane for being bold enough for expressing your Africanness in your hairstyles over the last few years, and ultimately to thank CBC for supporting you and not taking you off air just because you're expressing your blackness. Those little expressions speak volumes for the diaspora, and I want to applaud CBC in their efforts. I want to thank the government for the focus that I have never had growing up as a child, where we are actually being taught to be proud of what we have. I did not know of Golden Square. I did not know of the Freedom Village for most of my life until very recently. And there's no shame in it because I accept now that I was miseducated, so to speak. So this call really is just to commend you, and as you segue into reparations, I must commend Ambassador Comissiong for fighting this fight for years and me not understanding it and even stooping. Thankfully, the veil is being lifted off of my eyes, and I recognize that there is value in the discussion, and I look forward to hearing it. I'm really enjoying the ambassador as well. Keturah, I think, is the name, and that's a wonderful name, and I know the genesis of it. So I am tickled pink tonight, and I am having my daughters watch the television as well, because I'm hoping that they get into their craniums what I didn't have when it was their age. So I just want to commend CBC tonight. That's all.
Thank you so much, caller, for the kudos, and it's all about the message. And you're very right. It's a message that you, Ambassador Comissiong, have been pushing for decades, with the resistance against you. I know the fight has been tough, but look, you've reached another stage of the journey, and it's a bit more pleasant on this side of it. But
that caller pleases my heart so much. I mean, you could not want a better testimony than that, and that tells us, that we are on the right path, and that what we are doing is resonating with our people. Yeah, Shane, but I don't even want to. Yes, I feel vindicated in so many ways, and so pleased with what Barbados is becoming. And you introduced the topic of reparations, Shane. But let me say here that we are only going to win the battle for reparations if we transform the campaign for reparations into an international mass movement, similar in scope and size and power to the anti-apartheid movement, the international anti-apartheid movement of the 1970s and 1980s. And we are only going to be able to transform, to develop our reparations campaign into an international mass movement if we Caribbean people, if it starts with us, if we understand the history behind the reparation claim, and if we appropriate the reparations campaign not only at an intellectual level, but also at an emotional level. And our people will only attain that kind of level if we engage in the public education. And this is why, Shane, this season of emancipation is so vitally important. And you really have to give kudos to the government of Barbados, the Prime Minister's office, the minister responsible for culture, and all the rest of them. We know this year we have a 4.5-month season of emancipation. We packed into that that 4.5-month period are over 30 different events and programs. And Shane, it began on the 14th of April when we started with the commemoration of the Bussa Rebellion. We went to the Confederation riots, 1876, Heroes Day, Labor Day, African Liberation Day, the 25th of May, which is coming up. And we're going to go right through Emancipation Day, the Day of National Significance, Marcus Garvey's birthday, the day to commemorate the abolition of slavery. And what the government is trying to do with this extensive season of emancipation is to really reach the Barbadian people, to give them a deep understanding of our history, of our struggle, and ultimately out of that understanding will come an appreciation of what is owed to us. And I am here giving credit to the government for this very extensive season of emancipation, but I also need to say, just as the caller before was implying, that there were a number of Pan-Africanists and Pan-Africanist organizations who way back had pioneered, whether it was in commemorating African Liberation Day, the anniversary of the Bussa Rebellion, the Day of National Significance, Marcus Garvey birthday, the Rastafari as well, who in a sense, plowed the land, and we are now seeing with the state really fully coming on board, embracing it, giving it greater legitimacy, putting resources behind it. We are now seeing it really blossom. So yes, Shane, I am very hopeful about our reparations campaign, because I know when you have a cause that is righteous and just, and you pursue it with commitment and determination, ultimately you are bound to prevail. So I know that we are on the right path, but it is going to call for a sufficient number of our people really understanding the history behind it, and really embracing it at an intellectual and an emotional level.
Yeah, we'll really have to pull the diaspora from right across the world coming together to push for reparations in a big way. Keturah, I would want you to come in on that as well, our battle for reparations and your thoughts, but we have some callers on the line. They want to share their comments, and I'm pretty sure they have some questions for you and Ambassador as well. Good night, caller. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your comment or question?
Good night, Shane.
Good night.
And good night to your guests. I want to know how many Barbadians came from Africa, and what part of Africa they back from, and who is responsible for bringing them to Barbados.
Well, thank you for your question. So a three-part question there. Where did most Barbadians come from? The part of Africa. How did they get here? Who brought them here?
Well, Shane, we came primarily from West Africa, from what they call the Upper Guinea Coast, the Lower Guinea Coast, from what was known as the Gold Coast, which is today Ghana. That's the area that most of our ancestors came from, and they came on slave ships. They came on basically British slave ships, but because Barbados was a British colony from 1625 right through to 1966. Barbados never changed hands, but our Caribbean brothers and sisters, they went through not only British colonizers, they went through French, Spanish, Dutch colonizers, so Danish colonizers, so almost the whole of Western Europe was involved in the transatlantic slave trade, or the transatlantic trade in enslaved persons, enslaved Africans. But I am surprised at the question, because it says to me, the question says to me that we have not done enough in our formal education system to teach our people their history. But fortunately, hopefully this is going to be rectified very soon. The Ministry of Education, between 2020 and 21, they set up a history curriculum development committee under Dr. Henderson Carter. I served on that committee, and we have put together a history curriculum for primary schools and for the first three forms, first, second, and third form in the secondary schools. Right now, the curriculum that was developed is being treated as a pilot project that is being run in a few select schools in order to work out whatever kinks there might be, with a view to it being introduced right across the entire school system. But the fact that we still have Barbadians who are not clear on something as basic as the transatlantic slave trade, it says to me that something is definitely missing in our education system, and we need to correct it as soon as possible.
Okay, we'll take a quick pause. Keturah, I know you have some comments to share with us on your thoughts about reparations and where we need to go with the battle. We'll take a quick pause here. We've had a great discussion so far on the significance of emancipation and what it means to Barbadians in 2022. As we are in the season of emancipation, so many programs and educational facilities will be rolled out so that Barbadians get a better understanding about what emancipation should mean and what it is and what stage we are at. The ambassador had his say on what needs to be done as far as reparations are concerned. I wanted to get Keturah to hear what she thinks about what needs to be done to ensure that the colonizers pay for what they did to us as a people. And they've seemed, when you hear the general conversations in Parliament, in the UK, and in other similar spheres, they sound very resistant. They don't think that 400 years later that they should have to pay for what their ancestors did. What are your thoughts?
Who wants to give up privilege? Who wants to give up any of their wealth, no matter how it was gained? So it's not surprising at all. It's something that we know would be, and it has been. Let me step back and recognize that this current wave of demand for reparation is about the eighth iteration of reparations claim. Wherever African descendant people were transported out of Africa under conditions of slavery to become enslaved people, captured, kidnapped, brutalized, and all of that, they have always, at the earliest opportunity, demanded reparations. So this is not the first iteration. In this current iteration, we've seen how catalytic the Caribbean movement has been, in that in all parts of the world, the Americas, in Europe, even in far-flung places, we have seen reparations movement and Pan-Africanist organizations feel that resurgence, that reinvigoration, and they have joined the call for reparations as well. So there is, in fact, a global march and a global demand towards reparations. What I think really needs to be done, and I concur with the ambassador having said that earlier, is how much more education we have to do. Because at least two of the questions tonight signal to us that until every Barbadian, until every Caribbean person, until every African descendant, or at least the majority of them, understand what the demand for reparation is, the context, the rationale, the scope of it, the extent to which Africans, Pan-Africanists are united in demand for it, until people understand and really feel convinced that this is a just and a worthy cause, we can't really make the kind of success that we're looking for. So I think at this point in time, we need to do a lot of more engagement of each other to explain what reparation really is. There are many myths, there are a lot of misunderstandings. We need to clear that up so that we can move forward as a reunited front. David made mention earlier of the anti-apartheid struggle. This call for reparation at this point in time, and given the global shaking up that we have experienced over the past 2 years, and it's continuing right now, it's a very different world that we are living in than we were 5 years ago. And people are beginning to wake up and to understand that even where you felt, some people felt that the reparations call was, a pipe dream, people are beginning to rethink and reconsider. And because so much information is now available, people are beginning to understand that this is something that they need to become more aware of, they need to be more involved in. So I would say that we're making good progress in terms of organizations throughout the region and outside of the region. Many Pan-Africanists are united in this call and are working together to raise that demand. But we do have to engage our brothers and sisters a bit more right here on the ground in each of the Caribbean territories, so that we all understand and we are all resolute in our demand for reparations. But there's no turning back.
No turning back
The
indeed.
former enslavers, the former slave masters, owners, and so on, never thought that the day would come when the people would be so resolute. I mean, the charm offensive that was planned to celebrate the platinum jubilee of a certain individual has blown up. Caribbean people have, of one accord, showed their displeasure, their disdain, and have confronted these representatives of the British Crown to say, hey, don't come here with that. You could do this in the past, or you got away with it in the past, but not right now. Right now,
Indeed.
we're standing very firm to say reparations. Rastafari always said reparation is a must, because for us, time is elastic. We're not counting our time by calendar. We're counting our time as eternal, and 400 years of atrocities that has to be corrected.
And
And we're only asking for compensation for our labor. We're not
yeah.
asking for compensation for a whole heap of other things that you really cannot put a price on. I think
And
David wants to add something, so I'll give him a minute.
well, unfortunately, we have
If there
run
is.
out of time. Time has been very short. This program has flown very quickly. One thing I would want from you in the final seconds, David, Ambassador Comissiong, before we go, where can people find information about the season of emancipation, if you can tell them that very, very quickly?
I would imagine that it's available on the GIS, Government Information Service website. I would think so. Yes, it would definitely have to be on the GIS website. I can tell you that today was the International Day of Families, and that was held at the Rock Hall Freedom Park, and Bajans really need to go and see this beautiful new community facility that has been developed at Rock Hall. And then we will go to
very quickly, Ambassador.
25th of May, Africa Day, what used to be Africa Liberation Day, but there's a whole host of other events coming right down, culminating on the 31st of August. So check the GIS website. I'm sure you'll find all the info there.
Ambassador Keturah, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge with the Bajan people tonight with us here. There are so many people who want to know where we are at with reparations, where we are at with emancipation. As you said, Ambassador Keturah, it is a journey and we will continue along it and try to make those progressive steps. But thank you for sharing with us tonight. And of course, thank you viewers for watching us here on The People's Business. I'm Shane Seeley. Do have a good night.